Hi my fellow tailors. If you are sick and tired of making the same standard shirt sleeve placket over and over again, I recommend you trying this Neapolitan shirt sleeve placket. Why I call it Neapolitan? Because I mostly find it on the garments of Italian shirt makers such as Anno Mutuozzo or Diavino shirt from Napoli. Also, you may use this technique to finish the front placket of your shirt, like for example Dylan and Son did. So now, without further ado, I'm gonna show you the whole process from start to finish with all my tips and tricks, and of course I'm gonna provide you with all the necessary templates. In this tutorial, we're gonna make such nice and hand-finished sleeve placket from scratch. And to make things more interesting and challenging, I'll be working with striped fabric. First of all, we're gonna need a pattern. There is a link to a free PDF pattern in the video description. This one I made out of heat-resistant cardboard and punched some holes marking the start position of the slit and length markings in centimeters. Next, you got to have your sleeves cut. If you don't have your personal bespoke shirt pattern and you always wanted one, DM me on Instagram for Practical Online Bespoke Courses on trousers, shirt and jacket. Details are in the description below. So, let's continue. I have cut 2 sleeves, but the important part that the slit isn't cut just yet. We will do this later. I need only one of those. And don't forget to mark the wrong side of the sleeve. This is a mark of a slit position I transferred from my pattern. If it were a plain fabric, I would use it, but I'm working with striped fabric, so I have to adjust the position of the slit so it runs through the dominant stripe I choose to be the center of the placket. Let it be a purple one. This pattern has different length markings from this point, which is the beginning of the slit. So from this point it is 11, 12, 13, 14 or 15 centimeters. Also, you have to keep in mind, here is a 1 centimeter seam allowance for cuff attachment. So let's choose the length of our slit. Usually it is 12 centimeters long plus 1 centimeter for seam allowance. I'm a taller guy and my sleeve is quite long, so proportionally I would like it to be 13 centimeters plus 1 for seam allowance. This is a leftover piece and here I marked the wrong side as well. And before we cut out the placket, there are 2 things we need to do. First of all, we got to trim off the selvage, because in some cases selvage can shrink and pucker side of the fabric, deforming the pattern. It is especially noticeable on striped and checked fabrics. Secondly, it is useful to spray starch this piece a bit. Completely dry it out. Now, as it is starched, it got stiffer and feels like paper, and that is what we need for nice folding. Place the pattern so its central line runs on top of the chosen dominant stripe. At the bottom, I'm keeping some extra fabric for comfortable machining. And now I have to add 1 centimeter seam allowance to all the edges. And if you want to make things quicker, you may use my template that already has all necessary allowances built in. It's very useful if you cut plain fabric. But here I have stripes, so they are my guidelines, because my goal is to make this placket symmetrical. Using this cardboard template, I'm gonna press my seam allowances onto the wrong side. I'm using the hard edge of template to fold the seam allowances, and at the same time I got to make sure that I fold strictly along one of the stripes. If your pressed seam allowance is a bit off stripe, take your time to fix that like I'm doing here. After the pressing, I check if my dominant stripe runs through the center and both edges are also folded symmetrically along the same stripe. Now I quickly trim these allowances up to 5 mm. Of course, you may leave them 1 cm wide. That is totally fine, but shirting fabric is usually thin and somewhat transparent, and since I have some contrast stripes here, I don't want them to be visible. You may ask, why don't you just fold in 5 mm instead of pressing a 1 cm and then trimming it? Fair question. It's not very comfortable to fold such narrow seam allowances. You just don't have enough fabric to grab with your fingers. As you can see, with wider allowances, I can hold everything together and make nice and crisp fold like this. And this is, by the way, the demonstration of how to shape a plain fabric without stripes or checks. Just cut, starch and fold it. Quick and easy. Using the template, let's mark the length of the slit. The distance from the top is 13 cm plus 1 cm for seam allowance. And that is our central stripe. Here is our marked slit position, and it is very important that I am still on the wrong side of my sleeve. Make sure that the central stripe of the placket runs over the same stripe we marked for the slit position and everything is aligned. You may baste or pin sleeve and placket together, and we are ready to stitch. Let me show the presser foot I'm gonna be using. It is just a narrow presser foot. It's 5 mm wide in total. It's actually made for zipper attachment, but I also use it in shirt making for some fine stitching. You may use the standard presser foot as well. I start machining at this fabric excess. It helps with avoiding bar tacks and to get nice and clean stitching. As you can see, I was stitching no more than 2 millimeters to the left of the central stripe, made a turn and went back. I used high density stitching, and the most important part is the spacing between these two rows of stitching. It has to be 3 or 4 millimeters max. If you make it narrower than that, it will be difficult for you to cut through. If you make it 5, 6 or more millimeters, it's gonna create a big gap, which doesn't look very elegant. So keep this width between 3 and 4 millimeters. Now carefully cut through the very center, stopping 1 or 1.5 centimeters before the end of the stitching. And using my high precision scissors, I cut towards the corners, leaving 1 millimeter uncut. You have to get such a small triangle. Carefully turn the placket onto the right side. Neatly straighten the edges, helping yourself with an iron. For hand finishing, I'm gonna use white Gutermann silk thread S303, or you may just use regular polyester Gutermann Mara 120 or 150 in matching color. I start finishing the inner part first, pick stitching very close to the edge. The spacing between stitches is about 5-7 millimeters. Don't rush it, be very careful and patient. After that, it's time to hand finish the outer edge with the same thread and stitching, making sure all the stripes are matched. After finishing all the edges of the placket, give it a light press, cut out the excess at the bottom, and the sleeve is ready to be finished. But before that, let me show you some shirts I've made recently with this placket using machine finish. Here is my client's summer linen shirt. Of course, all stripes are matched and all the edges are neatly machine stitched. So if you're not a big fan of hand finishing, you can achieve nice and elegant result with a sewing machine. And here is an order for another client. He chose this funky flamingo pattern, so I matched it as well, and I also used machine for top stitching. The sleeve is ready, the seam is also hand finished, the cuff is attached. Next step is inserting the sleeve and making a buttonhole. The interesting thing about this cuff, it has floating interlining, meaning that it is completely unfused. You can pinch the fabric from both sides, and the interlining is sewn inside, creating the necessary shape and stiffness. It is old but very interesting technology. And lastly, I finished the slit with a silk bar tag. There is a full free tutorial on my Instagram. Check it out. Try this placket yourself and tag me on Instagram so I can see your result. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section. If you like my content and you want to support the future release of such free, big and detailed tutorials, you can do that through the Buy Me a Coffee website. The link is in the description below.